I use social media to tell parts and bits of my story because I also am not ready to own up to it. It's amazing that the inner voices then brought me to this point to say, whether you do it online, you have to tell us the story of your real life. And it's worse when you have to do it visually, when you have to have people seeing your face as you tell your story. And the two of you met through just online reading and writing. But it kind of intertwined with the real life at the end of the day. So for example, if I can take you through the process for myself, I edit for Ubusi, and she tells stories, and I always wear the hat in terms of different roles of helping her develop the story. Like, I'll be able to highlight that at this point, I'm not sure what you're saying. At this point, I hear the message you're trying to send, but the way you paint it doesn't work. And it was funny for me, and it's the reason that I wanted to talk to Ubusi about Princess and the Piper. It was funny for me that when I was sitting with the manuscript and I was the woman with the red pen that was saying, no, scratch this line, say this line, no, move that, move this, and I frustrated the hell out of her. It didn't actually sink in at the time. We went through that process. We finished Princess and the Piper. It went through the production of printing. I got the book, and I hardly read the books after because I've already read the story over and over while editing. But I was actually sitting in an Uber. And while I was sitting in the Uber, I then had this download, as we call it in our voices. I had this download, and in the download it said, do you realize that you are Oyama? And I thought, nah, there's no Daniel in my life. My mother's not a Candace. You know, so you also kind of in denial when you receive a trigger. But on life, I mean, online, and I think it's not a mistake that I said on life. Online stories tend to trigger or remind you of the things that you need to heal about yourself. And then I realized that I went through a rape, for example, and I went through it, and I got to a point where, when I was going through my initiation, when we bring in the healing aspect, when I went through my initiation, it was one of the things I needed to heal about myself through the process. And I had to accept that the rape happened. It is violation, it is traumatizing, but at the end of the day, it happened to your body. Because one of the reasons we hide these things under a carpet, which Busi happened to capture very well, is the fact that you feel shame, and shame is it's the worst of the things that a woman needs to deal with. So you go through this shame process, you put everything on you, you wonder what you could have done differently. I think I remember, and this is one of the things that even when we were in Stramas, or even when I have conversations with Busi, I've never spoken to her about. So my rape scene happens to be very close to my nephew. And for a long time, I avoided that spot or being around the area altogether. But then my brother had a baby with a girl who lives close to that spot. And I had to then be there, and I had to always go and see my nephew. So I never really realized the healing that it brought to then pour love into someone else and have to get over myself about being traumatized about an area. It was very, and all of this downloaded at the same time. That, do you realize that when you were raped, you never dealt with it properly? You had stuff that you were ashamed about regarding the rape, and you actually assigned the emotion to an area, and through loving your nephew, you learned to overlook or heal yourself from not wanting to be in that space. But there's many things that happen when we talk healing. And you, Thuli, for example, had been reading the stories that Busi had to tell. I mean, Princess and the Piper is her latest book. It's the 5th book in her series. Well, her series is 3, but she's written 5 books. You've been following her with even the online books. And yet, you managed to now be an input in her last or latest book. So, online and real life always has a way of intermingling or having that entanglement. How has that helped you in real life, or given you the voice to continue telling the Thuli story?
It's funny that you talk about Princess and the Piper that way. I think when it comes to Princess and the Piper, I had so much more input in that book than I had in the previous books. In the previous books, I have some level of input, but it's not like explicitly asked of me. But I would probably, after reading it, I'll give it a very detailed review. But mostly I publish Busi's books on Amazon, so there's always something to edit when you publish it. And I remember the Fallen Candle. I hated that because there was a lot of editing that I had to do in terms of formatting, etc. That I had no choice but to read most of the story before I published it. I usually prefer to publish it and then buy the book and then read it. But then at that point, I couldn't. So I was like, you know what? I will do what I need to do to publish the book. And then after it's published, I will stay for a couple of months and then go back to reading it. But with Princess of the Piper, so I think from my earliest interactions with Khosi, when I gave her my reviews, etc., I have always been open about my experiences. And I would read some of her scenes and then give her my view from my point of view, or if it triggers something, or if it reminds me of something, or if I feel like, oh, she's written about that, because now I've come to learn that most of the things is out of research. So to give weight to her research, I'll be like, oh yeah, it's funny you said that. This is how it happened to me, and blah blah blah. And then give a whole spiel about it, and then she will take it however. But with Princess and the Piper, she would do one chapter and send it to me and say, what do you think? And then I would give different critiques. And sometimes I feel like a part of my story is, even though I don't actively write at this point publicly, I still write, but not publishing it. But I feel like a part of my story is being told through Busi's books, in a sense. It may not be intentional, but I think, so with Princess of the Piper, I was reading it page for page for page. I think there were some instances, like there are some things, as I said, that there's an intimacy that Busi would put in some of the books in terms of the detail, in terms of the care she puts into the emotions that she expresses, etc. And I'll be like, oh my God, do you know, I remember there were like some things that I actually am embarrassed to admit. And I'll be like, oh, this is what happens to me. And this is what I'm so embarrassed about. And I'm so glad you write about that. Or do you want more input to write more about that? And I'll be like, oh, okay. And, like it gives that. There are so many things that sometimes I may not necessarily actively remember that I get to remember by discussing a chapter that she's writing. And then I'll be like, oh yeah. So I think with Princess of the Piper, it was mostly about things that have, like it's easier to talk about the pain and all that stuff, but then there are some things that we are kind of embarrassed to talk about, like some kinks that you get and all that stuff. And you're like, oh my God, I've always been so embarrassed to own this part of me. I've always been because when it comes to sexuality, when you've been traumatized, particularly at a very young age, you now don't know whether you genuinely like this thing or you like it because there's a link, or you genuinely hate this thing or you hate it because there's a link to whatever. So you can't discover yourself sexually outside of that context because it's intrinsic to who you are. You've never experienced sex outside of that context anyway, and taking that power back. So I think that's where online and on life kind of collide when it comes to my interactions with Busi and her shaping up the Princess of the Piper.
Awesome. Okay, the beginning was, at what point did you realize, because if we think about the Harvard wife had elements of healing to it. So there's no disregarding the fact that you had women that were in failed marriages that related to the story. You had kids that probably went through what Oyama went through as you painted it. You had women that had their first love and they were in love still with their first love and they related to the story. But I don't think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think when you wrote The Harvard Wife, the intention was to get into topics that are healing. But you're beginning to say, now I want to, because I remember when we were working through Mazwi, and I told you that your voice sounds different now. I don't know if you realize your beginning was then or your beginning was even before. Because there's an element of, I'm telling a story because I have a voice that says, tell the story. And then there's an element that says, for example, I use myself when I'm writing about myself, but I I impose my experiences on characters. And when was your beginning to say, now my sole thing is to say, I receive a message that needs healing, or I receive a message about things that women are going through, and now I'm going to start writing books that are going to, at the end of the day, come out as life lessons, if I can put it that way?
I think it was with her silent scripts. I think with her silent scripts, because there was a lot of trauma in her silent scripts, and it wasn't really just what she went through, but it was more of what people suffer through in silence, you know, because if there's one thing we are taught, especially as African women, it's shame. You know, shame is something that is, you're not supposed to shame your family. You know, there is shame in behaving in certain ways. There is shame in your periods. You know, when you stain yourself in class, if you're in grade 7, you're starting your periods, and you stain yourself, you are shamed. You know, because people laugh at you, but it's natural, it's biology. So why are we being taught to feel ashamed of so much? And because we are taught shame from a young age, we are taught to suffer the shame in silence. So from her silent screams, when a lot of people were actually telling me their own traumas, because there's also a bit of sexual trauma in her silent screams, and other traumas that Ofara couldn't voice out. She couldn't, because literally she didn't have a voice. So then it became, my message of healing became intentional. We as women, we suffer from a lot of things, especially as African women. You know, I feel like as Black people, you know, Black people have been marginalized for centuries. They're still marginalized. But then there's being Black, and then there's being a Black woman, you know, because being a Black woman, you're not only made to suffer by other races, but also people from your own race will also make you suffer, not just the men, but the women as well, you know. And so it was, I intentionally write about things that Black women suffer in silence, you know, and things that they're ashamed of, that they shouldn't be wanting to heal from, that they shouldn't be wanting to be known to say, okay, so your husband is doing. There's so much that we're taught to hide, you know. Even when you get married, you're told, keep whatever is happening in your home, keep it private, you know.
Don't air your dirty laundry.
Don't let anyone, you know when you're out there. Just smile, and I'm like, but why is it that so much of our suffering has to go on in silence? Like, why does it? And especially in things of a sexual nature, because I also noticed that when I started openly talking about sex on Facebook, you know, my Monday motivations, you know, when I would openly talk about sex, you know, women would be like, wow, you're talking about it. Like, and it's like, okay, a lot of women suffer from not even orgasming, you know. It's something that and you have to do it in silence, because then if you are revealing it, it's sort of like you are then shaming your partner. But one of the things is that orgasms is about you as a person. You know what? You can be with a partner who is sexually satisfied, but you cannot reach your orgasm, because it's a mind thing more than anything else. It's a mental thing, you know. And so I feel like as women, for us to fully live, you know, for us to fully be whatever we're meant to be, there is so much we need to unlearn first. There is so much that we need to, and the first thing that we need to unlearn is shame. Shame over a lot of things, you know. Shame over squatting, shame. Like we are taught, shame over a lot of things. We're ashamed to be living in one bedrooms. We're ashamed to be. There's so much shame for African women, you know. I was reading a thread on Twitter just this evening when this woman was saying her niece, the teacher through the...
So Thuli raised a hand. I don't know why Busi is raising a hand. I mean, Thuli is raising a hand when there's the three of us. I'm assuming that what she has to say is quite... Yes, and it needs to be said now. Okay, Thuli. So you want to add to shame?
Yes, I wanted to add to
Since
shame.
shame is becoming our theme.
Yeah, because like the thing that held me back from writing to begin with was shame, but
Yes.
that was self-imposed shame. And then when I started writing, I got over that quickly and opening up and getting that love from strangers and people I knew who were not so close to me and all that stuff. And the funny thing is that people were very close to me, except for family, were stunned and they were not very receptive. But then the people that were not so close to me were the ones who were pouring me with love.
Yes.
And then the funny thing is I was writing to overcome shame, but then there was people started shaming me. I remember somebody called my older brother to shame me. And she was like, oh, and it was a distant relative. She called my brother and she said, oh, how do you let her write these things in public? Blah, like she went in on my brother. And my brother was just like, it's not your story to tell. Just leave her alone. How is that a bother to you? You're a distant relative to this, but I'm okay with it. What's your problem? And I've had church shamed me, and I've had people on pulpits throw so much shade at me.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that just made me think, you know what, screw this, I'm not doing church anymore.
I love it. I think, let me interject for a second. I think one of the things that Ubusi knows me for is that, minus the fact that I enjoy editing, I enjoy it because I realize how much more pain words bring in. And as a person that loves words, I always say that words then become swords, and it's the same letters, just spelled differently. They are such swords that can then stab you and dagger your life and your heart so painfully beyond the actual experience. And we're not aware of it because Busi explained the fact that we carry a lot of shame as Africans from our history. But with the new lingo, if we look at new age stuff, the new lingo is now shade. And everything is like shade. And we don't understand that there's people that are actively and proactively putting on shame on you because it's a cool thing to shade something. It's a cool thing to say something bad. It's a cool thing. I mean, one of the things that is irritating me at the moment, and sometimes I fight it and sometimes I find it hilarious. I don't know. It depends on what it triggers. And we've had the discussion with Busi is how people are saying, yo, healers nowadays look so cute. I would sleep esgodlweni, for example, and esgodlo being the place where you talk to your ancestors. It's such a respectful space for you to say you are willing to go there and have sex with this person because she is a vessel of healing that looks attractive to your eyes. It's shade, but at the end of the day, it might bring shame to the person that is a healer to say, do I still send out these messages when I'm attracting men that are going to sexualize me? And for me, this is key that I bring it up here because it is all part of sexual healing. And people think that sexual healing only starts at the point of violation, but it starts with a word. And I think what I want to bring into the space is the fact that when I finally could embrace my beard, even, for example, and I've said this before, I embraced my beard because it was a part of me. I had to say, it's hair that grows on my face, and I can't do much about it unless I want to spend money shaving, going to waxing, and going to lasers. But what I didn't realize was I was doing all of that because when men were looking at my sideburns, even before the beard started, when men looked at my sideburns, they told me that women with hair or with hairy faces are good in bed. And because that came with the trauma, I then had to cut it so that they don't see me as a sexual object. And then I went through my rape experience, and I remember the perpetrators talking about how hairy I am. And I associated hair on my body with something that would attract the person to say, I'm this object that you can use, I'm this object that you can sexualize because, hey, hair grows on my body, never mind my face. So people don't see, oh gosh, Google, people don't see the depth of some of the traumas that we carry in ourselves.
When I started writing my story, I started attracting a certain type of men, and I didn't realize it until much later that I was attracting a certain type of man that wanted me because of the experiences that I went through, either because it was their kink or because they wanted to save me. Or because they were like, the girls with abandonment issues and daddy issues or whatever, sexual issues, or I can easily manipulate her and all that stuff. And I'm like, so those are the kind of things that I actually battle with in terms of, do I want to go back to writing? Because it feels like when I did my first bout of writing, it was just from an honest space and blah, blah, blah. But then all this started coming up and there was a lot of anger, and I've had to go through the healing. The anger is now gone, I think. But then there's now that thing that, okay, I'm okay with writing my story, but then these are the things that come with it. Yes. How do I don't know how else to live, but how else to write, but being myself. If I now have to start censoring myself because I don't want these things to follow me, what does that then mean for me in my writing?
Yes. And it's a deep process. It's a deep process, whether you're doing it from a healing perspective, whether you're telling a story, whether you are the person that's going through a healing journey. Everything is a process, and I think one of the things that I want to be a take home with from this series is the fact that healing remains a journey. It's just like school. We think that if you're in grade 0 or grade 1, when you finally can master the art of drawing or being able to spell A, then you are good and you've passed and you have a golden star and you think it's all over. But the point is, you get to the next level, and at the next level you learn new things, you unlearn old things, and then you must master that point and get back to the next level. And funny thing is that life and life lessons always remain similar. You know, and for me the process starts with whatever that you have been sent on earth to learn. If it's love and you think that, hey, now I grew up in a loving family, I'm done. You're not done. You have mastered the art of relating to a family and having a loving home. Then you must learn to love friends. You must learn to love in a relationship. You must learn to love the rest of the human race, because we are all parts of God. So healing is also that process. There, Busi, Thuli, you know how to raise the hand digitally. Busi is physically raising her hand. Okay, let's go to you.
So I think that was one of the things. That was one of the things I think I tried to convey to both of you, that I didn't want Oyaba's healing to be holistic or to be in that sense whereby she was healed, you know, like because it's not realistic. There are some traumas that you carry with your whole life, you know, and there are some traumas that you can't easily relate to people close to you. So it took her talking to the people that she had kept at arm's length. It took her talking to Ukendis. It took her, because of that shame, exactly that shame I was talking about. And also, I wanted to convey that at times healing has to be intentional on your part, you know. So Oyaba, she wanted to heal, but she didn't want to accept or to acknowledge what had hurt her in the first place. She didn't want to acknowledge the place, like she shoved it away, because then if she allowed herself to acknowledge what hurt her, she'd have to acknowledge that her daughter was brought about by rape. You know, and for her, she had to disassociate something so shameful from something that brought her so much joy, so much, you know, love. You know? And I feel like, so at times you might go to like Oyama, she tried going to that club, you know, she tried going the traditional route, she tried this and that, but until she, you know, intentionally acknowledged where the hurt was coming from, that is when she started healing. And that was only at the end when she saw that girl and she was reminded of herself. And that is when she acknowledged that, okay, so what might have happened to me is rape. You know, I might try to say I kissed him back. I might try to say I led him on. But at the end of the day, I was a child. I was young. I wasn't in my right frame of mind. And he took advantage of that. And so a lot of our sexual trauma, we don't want to acknowledge it. We don't want to acknowledge the fact that we were molested. I remember my sister, like a cousin sister who used to stay with us. So when my mother, she's a nurse, so when she'd go for night shift, this cousin would bring in a boyfriend, you know, and they would sleep on the bed, my parents' marital bed, and they would sleep on it. But I would also be on that bed as well, you know. Imagine people having sex and you're like 7 or whatever years old you are. And so there's some trauma that you don't talk about, you don't, maybe a cause, but until you acknowledge that that part of you was violated or that part of you was hurt, until you acknowledge it, and until you intentionally try to heal that part of you, it will never heal. And I feel like that is why a lot of us carry this unresolved sexual trauma, is because we have assumed or associated shame with sexual trauma.
Yes.
You know? And if we remove that shame, if we can openly talk about it, to say, okay, this is what happened to me, and not have people feel pity for us, and not have, it's like, maybe if we get to a point where you talk about it as if you're talking about a toothache that needed to be, you know, until we get to that point, then our healing will be hard, because you can't heal once you're hiding. You know, you can't heal in hiding. You have to be open about it. You have to bleed openly, and after that bleeding, that is when the wound starts closing and the healing starts.
Yes, I totally agree. What you brought up, Busi, there's many things that you highlighted, Oyama. You know, for example, being in a bed with people that are having sex, your body will react because it's a sexual thing, but there's then the shame of, why am I reacting to something that's wrong? You know, so I want to have that discussion, one. And then there is the fact that some of the people get raped, and when you are getting raped, one of the shames that you carry is the fact that your body reacted, and you probably had an orgasm or not, or even if you didn't have an orgasm, some of the parts of your body that they touched made you feel good, but you were fighting that. You are always in conflict. Your body is always in conflict with the mind and your emotion. So I just want us to cover that part, cover what's next in terms of carrying on the journey of healing, because we've said, Guti, it doesn't end. So ladies, we've been talking about some of the things that traumatize us. We've covered shame, we've covered, we didn't particularly use the word guilt, but there's a lot of guilt that is associated with shame. So people feel guilty for, why did I go there? Why was I there? Why did I do the things I did? And I think that's what keeps them hidden, and that's what procrastinates the journey of healing. But then what helps in the journey of healing itself is that you then have people that help you along the way. There's people that will support your cause, and sometimes, Busi, you find that you have people that are supporting you as a writer, because they're buying your books, they're commenting and liking and sharing your posts, but they're doing this because they triggered about a part of themselves that needed to hear this, and they know there's more people that need to hear it, and this is how they participate. So Thuli, in this process of your healing, how have you received peer support from other people that are in the same space that you're at? Because I know initially you highlighted the shame that came, or the shade that came with you exposing your story. But how do you receive support, and how have people participated in your story that has helped you heal?
Okay, so first and foremost, I had a therapist that I go to. I've had the years and you know, like medical support, in a team of medical people that kind of support me. So that kind of is, I suppose, the bedrock of because that's kind of the expertise that I need, and you know, people who are there and their job is to help me get better. Because you can't get support from people you don't trust. So I remember the first therapist I went to, I was so ashamed at having had to go there, and saw her for 10 sessions. I remember when I finished my 10 sessions, I made a conscious decision not to remember her. I don't even know her name. I can't even remember the address I used to see her at. I can't even remember the name of her company or whatever. I didn't want to remember that. But it's always been important to have people that I trust. So I do have friends. So do have friends in the medical free field and all other fields, but there's people that you can always count on, that you can always talk to, and all that stuff. And then in my storytelling, I've met with people who are going through the same journey as me, or have gone through that journey, or are yet to go through that journey. Yes. And it is in the process of talking to them and giving them support or advice based on what I've experienced that I also get. I do, and through reading, a lot of my healing has come and support has come through authors. Yes. And there's loads of books I've bought over the years. There's books on vulnerability, there's books on all sorts of things, how to understanding all the different, facets of anger that are still in me that need to be ironed out and that I need to explore, etc. So, and of course, family.
Yes. Need family. And one of the things I've loved through social media is that what Busi was highlighting earlier on about tribes becomes family. Family is not always blood, and it's very, very unfair to expect people of blood to be able to support everything about you, because if you all grew up in the same environment, chances are you all going through similar pain or different pain. It doesn't have to be similar. But at the end of the day, the point is that you are able, you're very much able to help people and be a peer supporter. You're able to participate in other people's pain without being related to them by blood. And that's...
Yeah, sorry. I'd like to point out that in the process of me telling my story publicly, I lost a lot of friends. Like, my social circle has changed dramatically. You can tell that there's the before and then there's the after. And the funny thing is, there's people that I've known, like they are my ride or dies, people that I've known since that have stuck with me. And then there's people that I met along the way that just fell along the wayside. I went through a process of dramatic culling, and then there's the after. And also, it was in my writing as well that I met my tribe. I met people like me. I met people, I met my tribe. I met people who understood me, who understood my humor, who understood my like where you feel. I think there was a time in my life that especially at the beginning of my writing, where I felt so unheard, so misunderstood, and so unseen. And now I just continued doing it until I got to a point where I had my tribe. I don't have to explain my existence. My tribe.
Awesome. Let's talk to Busi's tribe. Busi, you, in terms of participation, you have people that are calling you, inboxing, WhatsApping, that are participating in your stories, and they've either become close or they've become inputs to your next story. But what I want to understand more is your support, because I think part of the reason, and I think probably it is the most significant and key reason for the series, and as I call the series Healing the Healer, some of the writers are not aware that they're healers. So what or who do you have as your peer support in telling these stories? Because once the word is out there, whether it is on Facebook or it's in a published book, you're going to have people participating in the story, in the discussion, in the topic. Who do you have as your peer support, and how has that helped your journey of continuing with telling your story?
Well, when you say peer, it's a bit confusing, because usually your age mates or people around you, maybe let's say people who do the same thing as you or something like that.
Yes.
Although I still have some of my friends from college. She was the first to read the Harvard Wife, the first chapter, and she was like, you know what, you sound like you've been doing this your whole life, so keep on doing. And even today she still reads, and she still picks up things about me, like writing. She's like, I noticed you eventually going to African spirituality with your writing. It's like, that's very perceptive, you know. And so yeah, then I have my more girls, you know, my circle, you know, they sort of keep me grounded, you know. The people where you don't have to be the author, where you don't have to be you're just you're just crazy, you're just who you are, you know. I have the people I've met online, like on Thuli, people have become friends, people have become points of reference. I have my editor. On good days, she's very great, you know.
How?
Yeah. So yeah, and she goes above and
okay.
And you know, but yeah, she is great. And yeah, I also do have, I think, the support of my partner. He's always like, he's not involved in the writing or anything, but when it comes to having to sell the books and they have to go to their respective people, he's the one who sends them out. His dad is always like, you know, running around with this and that. So it helps me to focus more on being creative, I think, and doing everything else. And yeah, so I think, especially with the Princess and the Piper, I remember, because I was afraid that I wouldn't do justice to the topic, you know. And so I reached out to Thuli, to Fezo, Lisa, you know. So because they had experienced rape, and some of them were gang raped, and then some of it wasn't once off, you know. And so it helped to hear what they had to say, and to validate some of the thoughts that came into my mind, because I didn't want it to be too far-fetched, you know, to say that when Oyama got a key out of, you know, the violation, you know, to say that is it something that can actually happen? Can someone actually then find pleasure from that? And it was surprising responses I got to say yes. And of course the shame, it's something that they don't talk about, something that they keep needing to say, okay, it feels like my body is betraying me.
Yeah.
This is what I like now, you know. And at times you don't know whether it's something that you would have liked if you had not been violated, or if it's just something, you know. And so it helps just having people at times to bounce around ideas too, and to have people to say yes, I think you're putting it is okay, or someone to say no, this is too far-fetched, you know, because at times we tend to maybe think by the fifth story you think, now I'm great at this, now
yes,
now I know I can do this in my sleep, but everyone needs support, whether it's writing or and the reason why I refuse to say peer is because my support just doesn't come from my age mates, and it doesn't only come from people who are involved in books. My support structure is very varied. Most of the times I'm the youngest, which is weird, but I think that my years, like Sheldon, can be counted in 8 years.
Oh my gosh, did you have to bring him?
But he's a legend. I cannot quote Sheldon Cooper. I cannot.
Oh yes, oh yes. So Thuli, we're coming back to you, and I think one of the things that Ubusi highlighted amongst the peer and the support that she's gotten is things and the people that have helped to develop self. So if I think about self-development, I think other people think it has to do with the book. It has to do with some course that you sign up on. It has to do with getting to a next and having a title that is assigned to it. So if I think about sexual healing, I relate to my story or my experience. It's moving, so self-development at times, and I want all the victims or the survivors, however they call themselves, when they're listening to this series, to realize that at times you are ashamed or feel guilty about the fact that when my perpetrator probably, for example, kissed my boobs, my body reacted and I felt something. And for the longest time you hate it, and for the longest time you deal with it And then at the point where you say, I'm now having sex for pleasure and I no longer associate it with a trauma. And developing yourself to a point of saying, oh, even in that trauma space, I realize that I enjoy being stimulated via my nipples, for example. And it's a hard thing to get to. It's a hard thing to embody your sexual desires after experiencing trauma. And you have to read up a lot. You have to relate to a lot of people, which is where Busi comes in. You know, we need our writers to write about these incidents so that people can feel free. We need you, Thuli, to blog about your story or just about sexual trauma in general to be able to make peace as normal people about it. And that's where I also come in to talk about the emotional burden that sometimes we think it's only just about sex, but it also comes in the love aspect, because some people express or their love language is physical. But if they have sexual trauma, then it's hard for them to receive love as a language in physical form, because they're still associated with pain. So there's so much that this subject covers, which is why I was nervous when we were starting this project or this particular episode. So Thuli, what have you done, or what are you still doing to develop yourself to move away from the traumatic space?
Yeah, okay, quite a lot. It feels like my life is dedicated to healing and to moving on, because I think I got to a point where I realized how much being unhealed stopped me from reaching my potential, from living the life that I truly enjoy, etc. So I had to be very intentional about my healing. And one thing I hated, and one thing that stopped me from doing it, was I hate feeling pain, especially emotional pain. And when you go through this journey of healing, you have to not be okay with it or enjoy it, but you have to be open to feeling and crying and doing whatever needs to be done.
Yes.
You know, in a very uncomfortable. So as I said before, I do get, medical professionals who help me, psychological, mental health experts, etc., who help me. But I think the biggest thing is self-awareness. So when you are, I think for me, the trauma happened from a very, very early age and for a long time. And I have not always been very present in my life.
Yes.
So I've learned to be present in my life and to listen. My life mission, as I said before, is following the whisper, check in with myself. And if I know that there's this part of me that needs to be dealt with, then I deal with it. About 4 years ago, so I saw a friend said to me, oh, I've got tickets to this entrepreneurship conference, etc. Like quite expensive. And she was like, do you want to come? I was like, yeah, sure. And I went. It was quite interesting and everything. And there was a gentleman that came up and started talking about the self-limiting beliefs. And I was like, I need to research this man. And if he's got any sessions or whatever, I'll follow him. Because I'd come to realize that there's certain parts of me, there's, when there's an incongruence between what you want and what you believe you deserve. We can say whatever we want, but if we don't believe we deserve it, we will self-limit ourselves from getting it.
Yes.
So I found some money and I went to his session. It was a 5-day training thing. And one thing that he got us to do was kind of meditation, just sit there and when I remember, I think it was probably the last day, I sat and I was doing meditation and I actually met the child in me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, those are special moments.
Yeah, she was so skinny. She was hiding. She had a tiny, tiny voice. And when I met her, I cried so hard. And I realized how much love she was lacking. I was just like, for a while after that, it was dedicated to nurturing my inner child, so it's those things that you do get, there are moments where you discover, okay, I need to deal with this part of me. And sometimes you just live life and you think it's okay. And then you come across an obstacle that reminds you, okay, this part of you needs healing. But then there are parts of healing where I had to seek medical help with things where where things were terrible. And I couldn't do it. I think that the harder parts are behind me, then now I can do like some healing exercises as I go along. Just check in myself and follow the wisdom. I think the harshest bit of healing that I had to go through was, there was a time where it felt like my life unnumbed, so there was no longer numbing. Numbing, and when you stop being numb, you start hearing so many things. There were so many voices that were speaking, and they were contradictory, and some of them were so painful and hurtful. But once I worked through that and got to a place where I can hear my own voice and hear my wisdom, and then just follow it. When I get to a stage of healing where I have to change direction, if I take time to check in with myself, my inner voice will tell me, this is the road to take now. This is where to go. Just follow it.
Wow. That is great. That is great. From your side, Busi, before we run out of time, what are you doing to develop yourself to be as authentic and keep being truthful about the story that you tell?
I just recently joined this author group where they do peer reviews. I feel like, yes, it's important to tell stories and to be heard, but it's also important to nurture whatever gift you have, so that it grows accordingly. So I usually subscribe to a lot of author blogs and everything else, so that I learn how to tell a story, because there's so many ways to tell a story.
Yes.
But you have to be intentional about everything. You have to be intentional about how you tell it, and you have to be intentional in your kindness to how you relay a certain character, because now I'm telling Candace a story, and Candace was just in the series, she was just a woman who gave birth to a married man's children, and so she's a mistress. But then I have to tell her story, and when I'm telling her story now, I have to be empathetic and also to be to be intentional in how I tell a story, to say, okay, this is what I want people to take out of it.
Yes.
And you never stop growing. I read this tweet that said that writing is rewriting, to say that you rewrite until it actually makes sense, until it's actually what you wanted to do.
Yes.
Basically, I keep learning from other authors, and I keep reading, which comes naturally. Reading, so yeah, I read and I keep writing as well, because with writing, it's something that you have to exercise daily. It's like a muscle that you have to exercise daily, so that yeah.
I'm actually truly amazed at the fact that you do this every time. I know that as much as I get involved in your writing a bit, the fact that you have this discipline to write and write every day, my goodness, that for me is a lesson as someone who loves writing and using words. It is.
I think you start small. I think the thing is to start small, to set up word counts per day. Like maybe start with 200 words per day, and then, but they have to be about something particular, because you find that we write a lot. If you consider how many words you write when texting and commenting on social media, it's actually a lot of words. So if you commit yourself to say, okay, today I'll write 500 words, tomorrow I'll write another 500, and then after a month you say, okay, let me shift it to 750. After another month you're like 1,000 words. After that you're like, okay, let's say 1,500 words.
Yes.
You find that with time it gets to a point where it becomes like, if you don't write, it feels like something, a part of you is missing. So everything that you do has to be disciplined. I feel like a lot of people think writing, in as much as yes, it's healing, and yes, it's but it's a profession.
Yes.
Even healing on its own, a lot of people think it's something that you just do. You wake up and you do. It's not. It's something that you train. You have to train it so that your healing doesn't further hurt someone when you're trying to heal them. So I think that everything you need to learn, put your all into it, and and so what's next is probably her silent screens. If I haven't been editing it as I should, because at times the voices overpower me, but yeah, definitely by next year I would have gotten around to it somehow.
Thuli, can I share a secret with you and everyone else in this audience? I've told her the silent screams was her greatest revelation in terms of starting to actively write about healing. And when she wrote it on Facebook, it was a great story. It was a love story about teenagers. It had some deep stuff that got us hooked, and it was about some deep stuff that made us feel like, I want to be there, I want to know, I want to. But at the end of the day, for her as a messenger, the plot or the task she has at hand now is actually to rewrite that story. As a matured writer, as a person that intentionally wants to heal. So, her problems, we're still talking between us two. She's here for the sake of being here, but the point of the voices that are haunting her right now is because the story, as much as it was a blow or a great, it was received greatly on Facebook, is to then rewrite it again. And say it now with intention, because she understands now that the task was to write about silent voices, or the people that have a lot to say but they cannot say it outright. So shame for her. It's not going to be something that she easily publishes as the next book next month or 2 months from now. She will have to work. She will have to work to make sure that she represents the silent voices that have a lot to say. But anyway, that was not the intention. This is the problem with the voices that take over your body.
She'll be fine. She's a great storyteller.
I know she is. I know she is. There's a lot of things that we do. There's a lot of things that we take for granted with the tasks that are put upon us. We call them callings. We call them purpose. There is so much that we need to deliver. Ubusi says she's working on the silent screens. Thuli, you had a story to tell. You blogged about it as much as I had a story to tell. And I avoided doing the published book, and I started this series. What is next for Thuli before we get to Ubusi?
I think I have to, well, I'd like to at some point. I know I have to start, I want to start writing again. For the public gaze, not just for my own. And yeah, I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Yes.
I'm still trying to figure it out. I've got safe options of things to do, but then there's the core thing that I know I need to do. Which, yeah.
Please do it.
I know. I'll let you know once I've done it.
and listen, be like me. Ubusi knows, ever since the moment I met Ubusi, I was supposed to write a book. She encouraged me to say, try it out, at least test out audience. And that's when I created my ghostwriter name, and I started writing on Facebook. And that was even before I started editing for her. So part of my calling is coaching writers. Part of my calling is discovering talent. Part of my talent is then helping them tell their story authentically and properly, which brings about the editor bit. But I still owed a book. And when the voices kept coming at night, every night, and I told them that I was busy with TikTok, guess what they said? If visual is then your form of expression, do the series. Tell your story and tell your chapters visually. And I started doing these interviews. So what I'm saying to you is, we deserve your voice.
You know, the funny thing is, for a long time, because sometimes, you know, when I say writing, it's like it's handwriting for me. When I start writing, I have, and then type later. Handwriting is what helps me and bleed and meet myself and all that. But it got to a point where it was too heavy, where like the times when I want to write it, I'm like, I'm not ready for that meeting, you know. I don't want to meet me at the end of this writing. So instead, for a long time, I've been voice recording instead. I'll take long walks and voice record a chapter or whatever, and then come back and then take another long walk and voice record. And I can't get rid of old phones because of like, I still work by recording.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we get stuck in the tradition of things. So take it with and I'll always refer to Busi because she's my muse. Shame. Let's not give her a big head, but she is my muse. So she's the person that was inspired by Facebook writers, but she was amongst the first to pioneer the journey of you don't have to only be stuck with Facebook. You can publish. And you don't have to be stuck with the process of traditional publishing. You can self-publish. And she learned the ins and outs of publishing. And today she's on her 5th book that she self-published. And I think one of the things that Upusi takes for granted and hardly shares with people is the fact that she is still a young woman who's supposed to be a lawyer, who came to South Africa for greener pastures. She's not the advocate she's meant to be. She's not standing up for human rights as she dreamed about it, but she is still healing through words, you know. And now you then have her in South Africa without a word, with so much that feels like obstacles, but she has such a great impact because she listened to her inner voice. And she didn't have to do it, because a lot of issues with us is that we focus so much on how am I going to do this thing that has come up in my spirit. But once she let go of the how, she's now doing it the best way she knows how. So in the last minutes that I have left, with thanking everybody that has tuned in today to listen to the story, Busisekile Khumalo, Mrs. Nkomo, I thank you for my growth. I thank you so much for the things that you have done to help me heal myself that you are not even aware of. And I hope that it brings about your healing. It continues to support you in healing other people. Any last words from you?
It's way past my sleepy time.
Of course.
I'm just working on it.
Of course. You have run out of everything. Adrenaline.
No, but I think that I love what you're doing. And you keep pushing my boundaries in as much as you say that I inspire you, but you keep pushing boundaries, not only for me, but for yourself as well. Because there's no age, you know. In your 20s, in your 40s, you find your purpose and you walk with it. Whenever you find it, whenever it strikes you, walk with it. And know that even at times, even if it seems like you have it all, there is some hurt which might be buried deep. And we people who tend to heal others, who tend to be there for others, it's hard for us to then reach out and say that, you know what, I'm hurting as well. I'm carrying this within me, in my soul. But it's okay to, you know, to not have it all figured out.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Busisekile Khumalo, also known as Mrs. Nkomo, and Thuli Mazwi from the UK, friends on Facebook and friends in real life. Sometimes we think real life means we need to meet, and yet we can create and have such meaningful relationships with people that we've met online, and we can heal others through our calling, with our talents and with our visions. And sometimes we don't know. We think that things are always meant to be self-serving, but I think the story of the two ladies today proves that at times your job might just be to heal the next person. It might just be out there to ensure that somebody who has sit, and I will always refer back to my intro video, sometimes we sit events and people in our path of healing, and then they have to do their part for us to recall and rediscover ourselves. So that for me is the main key for today. It may have started as a sexual healing episode in the series, but what I want as a takeout is the fact that it's not one way. There's no one method. There's no use in sitting and basking in guilt and shame. There's methods of help. There's reading, there's music, there's poetry, there's paintings. Book that session with a coach. Book that session in therapy. Get into kinesiology. Find a method that works for you to be able to release all the trauma that you hold in your body. One of the things that I want to highlight is the fact that our bodies hold all that trauma. Our bodies hang on to the things that we give to it. And we give things to the body because we can't face our emotions. And yet, in the same vessel, the soul wants to live its optimum life. So we need to reach a balance, and no one else can do it for us. People can be peer support. People can participate in lessons. They can participate in healing. However, the decision and the choice and the will lies with an individual. Let's do what we can and need to do to heal ourselves. I hope and wish that you will find your love, you will find your light and your healing through these conversations, through the series, depending on what topic that I cover. But I am sure, this I know for sure, one episode or another will help you through your healing, or will trigger your need to take up the journey of healing. Do what is right for yourself and find your healing. Thank you for tuning in. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for the next episode. I'm sending you so much